The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the O.R. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, C.O.R.E. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National C.O.R.E. and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Good morning. Greetings to the viewers of the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. How are all of you doing? I want to thank all of you loyal viewers who have been listening to the show, making comments, and helping the show to grow and thrive and improve. So I'm appreciative of that. The viewers are really the base of this show. I see Brother Ogawa there and Sister Robin, Sylvia Stewart, Brother Dreamchild, and others. You all are really the base of the show, and your interests and comments have helped us to improve the show. I want to particularly thank Brother Ogawa, Brother Laudazu, and Brother Lawrence Freelo for having stepped forward and devoted a great deal of time to improving the show. Others like Sister Robin Hughes, Francine Leonard, Angela Houston, Ajamu Webster, Steve McKenzie, and others, I want to thank for making financial contributions to the show, because in order for this to improve, it's going to cost some money to bring in people who can do certain things to improve the show, particularly recruit subscribers. I particularly am mindful of the comments that people make, and I have worked to try and improve the show based on those comments. Brother Ogawa, who's one of our younger viewers, and we have a lot of younger viewers, like many of you, see the implications that the show has and for the future. And I think that's important, and the way in which he's been able to clip small splices of the show and put it up on different platforms, including Twitter. That's important. So what I've done with this show is give you my best, both through putting a lot of time into research on subjects, but my main contribution is as an innovator putting forward new ideas. And so I'm providing backup. So I'm not going back to just stuff that I wrote and rehashing it. I'm always trying to come up with some new stuff. And I know that I have a conscious viewing audience, and I need to stay ahead of you if I can. And where I can, I'll learn from you and catch up. So the title of today's show is The Twa, the First People in America, Asia, and Europe. This is the fourth of a series. And so this particular one is going to focus on Twa civilization as it was planted all over the world. And the key thing to really get straight is that this was the largest spread of civilization by any people in the history of the world. And yet the Twa are removed from human history and put in the back room of anthropology. Genghis Khan is considered to be the greatest conqueror in world history. And he did not establish a system on every corner of the globe. He just controlled more real estate. The Twa didn't conquer anybody. They were the first people on the planet, and they moved everywhere, and they were everywhere. In Asia, in Europe, in South America, in North America, in the Pacific Islands, everywhere, in Alaska. I won't go into the Alaskans today, but they also have a Twa root. So think of it, the civilization with the greatest dispersal of people covering every continent, and the only people on all of these land masses for over 100,000 years. And so today's show is going to focus on this dispersion and talk about the Twa contribution, particularly in Europe, America, both North and South, and Asia. Another time I'll deal with the South Pacific at some other point. But the point is, that is the nature of the Twa contribution, being the first people. And we don't know how long they were in these places. They were there for the longest period of any stage of human history, the hunter-gatherer stage. And then some who migrated later to these areas, particularly Anu people, were in the agrarian stage, but some in Asia who are called Anu, A-I-N-U, during the hunter-gatherer and agrarian stage. So this is the longest period of human history. It's left its stamp on all of humanity. So that's what today's show is going to cover as part 4 of the Twa. And so today's show's title, again, the Twa, the first people in America, Asia, and Europe. So what we're going to do now is listen to a little bit more of Twa music to set the tone for this show. And then we'll get into the Chua presence throughout the world. Okay, we're working with this. Let's see if it can come through. What's happening? The picture hasn't come up. Oh, the music. Okay, you can't get it? Okay. What you do is bring back the part of the chat. The chat wasn't up before. Put the chat up. Okay. All right. So put me back on. Click my picture back in so I can get back on the screen and I can start the show. Yeah, but I'm on the side. Okay. And yeah, I'm up there now. Put me on chat and I'm out. Okay, we had a little problem here. There was a freezing of the screen when it came to the music. So we won't be able to do that music today. So today's show is going to be focusing on the Chua dispersal throughout the world. And it's going to focus on the Chua presence in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, and showing what the Chua brought into the world, creating the world's first civilization throughout the world. So the last three of the series, and this is the fourth, dealt first with the superlative light of God. And in this one, the series started off by dealing with the connection between God's superlative light and the life force of the planet. So the purpose of that was to really start this off on the spirit plane. And that was the first show. The second show was entitled The Primordial Trois, God's First People. This connected to the theme in the first show, which was the theme of the primordial light. And this was to show that the Trois were able to bring civilization to the world because of the purity of their character that enabled them to draw from the beautiful light. And that beautiful light empowered them through their pure characters with high clairvoyant and telepathic powers, so that they unified the logical mind and the higher mind. They didn't have to go through what we have to go through because we've experienced despiritualization. They were spirit people coming directly from heaven. So that was a very important addition from what I've covered before in the integration trap or the mother principle, in that while I talked about in the integration trap the spiritual powers and the power of the spirit, here I was focusing specifically on the fact that the Trois were the first people coming directly from heaven. They came in with extraordinary powers because they had not undergone the kind of tribulations that we humans have gone through now over hundreds of thousands of years, where I believe some of you may or may not in reincarnation, where we have gone through life and gone through ups and downs and positives and negatives, and we often come back to get closer to God. These were the people who were as close to God as you get, the first ancestors. So that was the point of the second show. The third show was entitled The Trois Transmission of Civilization Through African Ancestral Power. And this one focused on the fact that the most important value of the Trois to African people and humanity in general is the fact that they're the first ancestors, but it means more than it means to most of us in the Western world, who just treat it as ancestors, offer a libation, draw from them because they're with us on the spirit plane. But this is more, because this is talking about first ancestors and the fact that their purity of character opened them up to higher mind powers. And when other Africans, those the taller ones, come into being, they when they're going back to the source, whereas in the Western world it'll be some book or something or some authority, their first source on earth is a first ancestor. For different people, it would be the first ancestor of their people, the Yoruba, the Asante, the Dogon. But for Africa in general, and for the world in general, it's the first ancestors, and that would be the Trois. And they embody this higher power. So last week's show that went into the Niger-Congo region as a case study, this was really to show the general way in which the Trois civilized larger Africans. I can hear some people saying there's no sound. Let me know on the screen. Can you hear what I'm saying? Somebody let me know. Yeah, okay. It looks like that may be that person. Yeah, so last week's show was to give a case study on how the civilizing system worked in Africa for Africans in general. Um, and the Niger-Congo region is covering a big area that a lot of Africans in the Western Hemisphere are descended from, but Africans in general, because it's Central Africa, it's West Africa, it's parts of East Africa, and the Bantu people are coming, many of them from South and Central Africa. So that was not just a case study on the Niger-Congo region, which the Congo is where one of the two first people come from, the Twa from the Niger-Congo region, and particularly the Congo, and the Kung from the Kalahari Desert. And their language is the oldest, and they are without a doubt the oldest, but the Biaka Twa coming out of the Congo, according to mitochondrial DNA, as I pointed out before, trace back to be the oldest ancestors. So the example of the Niger-Congo region wasn't just for the Niger-Congo. It was to give you a case study on how this happened all over Africa. And if you'll note that in the story of a C.O.R.E and a Set, the story is that a C.O.R.E and a Set brought civilization, which is civil behavior, to the people of the Nile Valley. Now, who were these? These had to be taller Africans because they are themselves Anu, A-N-U, and the first people coming into the Nile Valley are in the Paleolithic period, and then that's a Stone Age, and then you move to the Neolithic, which is the agricultural stage, and by the time a C.O.R.E comes on the scene, that's the agricultural stage. And so the people he's civilizing are not Anu. They're already civil. He's taken some of these bigger Africans who are coming in and civilizing them. You understand? And then, according to legend, I don't know if this is true, he then goes to Asia and brings civilization to India. We're going to talk about the Twa migration to Asia later on. So this paradigm, some people will be offended by this. Oh, we were a period where we weren't civilized? All but the Twa were. You hear me? Everyone else had to learn civil behavior. And the Twa were the teachers. And I want to really stress in the last show, it was the Bantu people who said the Twa civilized them, not the Twa. The Twa are too humble to run around bragging and say, I did it. You know what I mean? It's all the people of the world that testify to this, just as a child will testify about their mother. You know what I mean? Huh? My mother is the one that, and we'll quote her. Or if you were raised by grandmothers, grandfather, and grandmother, then you're quoting your grandmother, your source, your life source. So the Twa played that role. So that was the reason for going into that and getting down to the fundamentals of what they introduced. And then the mentality that they had to produce it, a giving mentality, a caring mentality. Not an entitlement one, and definitely not an empowering one, meaning one where they want power over other people. So today's show is entitled The Twa, the First People in America, Asia, and Europe. And so this is looking at the migration patterns that the Twa follow. And then what they contribute to Europe, to the Americas, and to Asia. I'm not going to the Pacific today, but they were there as well. And so this is what you call the Twa contribution to world history and world civilization. John Henry Clark used to say, African history is world history. Well, now this is the best proof. And again, Some people will say, well, why the trois? If you're still asking it, I don't really need to give an answer. It was like I went into a car dealership once in Monterey, California, one of the pretty areas of the United States. And I was just looking at these cars, and these were Maseratis. Now I ain't got no money for no Maserati. I was just asking, how much did it cost? And the guy said, if you have to, I asked, I didn't ask how much it cost. I said, how many miles to a gallon do you get? You don't get any. They said, if you have to ask that question, you really can't afford this car. Well, I wasn't going to buy one if I could, and I definitely couldn't. And I'm saying, after this amount of discussion of the trois contribution to civilization, if you got to ask the question, why the trois, then please give me a break, because you can see that a people who created civilized behavior, the manifestation of it, and then the most profound aspects of what is called civilization, without having kings or queens, or being able or finding it necessary to locate themselves in cities, though they ended up doing that with Kemet. And they are the innovators of pre-dynastic Kemet. So I hope you get it. First is always important. You've always got to go back to the first of anything. Why did the trois focus on Orion when they went into the celestial sphere? Because that's the beginning of our stellar area, Orion. So they always go back to the beginnings. We're the people of the beginnings, And so how do we say that and leave the beginning out? So what I want to do is give you a little philosophical framework for this. I'm a philosopher, historian, political scientist, activist, and then I have some concentrations in other areas. But philosophy of all the thought systems is my favorite, and because it's a spirit system, unlike the West, which is speculative and got all of this boring theory. There's deep thought in African thought, but it's spirit-based. And so that's my first passion, and that's my first love. So I want to give you a perspective for looking at history from the philosophical perspective from an African framework, and it would be a new African framework as well. This is one you're not going to get from the Aryan historical framework or some of the Aryan historians who call themselves philosophers like Hegel, who will write you out of history and talk about only white people have reason and all of this madness. I'm not into that. So I'm not talking about that. But using the deep thought of the people, and in this particular case, African people and the world, I just wanted to put this discussion in a framework of deep thought or philosophy. And I would say that there are three phases in human history. Now, when you get to European history, they'll give you the ancient, medieval, modern. Ancient, what is that for them? That would probably be the Greeks. And then medieval, and then modern. And then they use this to look at all history. This is linear history, and European is a recent neighbor on the block of what's called civilization. I don't think they've yet been able to undergo the process of civilization. They're the most recent, a couple of thousand years when it comes to them making history. So what I want to do is just give you a little framework and see what you think of this, okay? And one is the hunter-gatherer phase and what it represented in history, and then the agrarian phase and what it represented, particularly from the African, Asian, Native American standpoint, and then the industrial and post-industrial phase that you're going through right now. So this is the way I characterize this, that in the first phase of human history, that we have different dates to go back to. Mitochondrial DNA, 144,000 years, give or take 10,000 years forward or backward. Then we have some historians who are saying 200,000, and some even a little earlier as the beginning of humanity. And that would be the beginning of the Kung people and the P.A.P.O. And then the Chua, and then the Anu. And the Anu are basically Chua. For Kemet, largely agricultural. So I describe, and this is consistent with the discussion that I've had for the last 3 shows on the Chua. I describe the first phase of human history, which, contrary to Western historiography, I'm going to use this big word, is supposed to be the backward stage. And I suppose they're applying their own experience to trying to explain the world, because they were pretty backward in the beginning. You know what I mean? So, and we're going to go into them and the ice and all this stuff. So in the beginning, that was kind of backward stuff, Neanderthal and all this stuff. By the way, Bill Clinton traces himself back to that. He's got a Neanderthal background, and you can sure say that's the truth. Sat over the genocide of people in Rwanda and prevented his administration from doing anything, and then later said, I'm sorry, ended welfare when it didn't even show up as a percent of the federal budget, 1%. Yeah, ended it while he upped the money for the Defense Department. So in the Western view, the first phase is backward. And the West view of the Chua, starting with the Greeks, was as a backward people, very often savage. And now anthropologists are trying to clean it up and say that that was wrong, some of them, but they still hold on to the Colin Turnbull view of the Chua, which is they don't remember their grandparents and they don't have any concept of God and all kinds of stuff. And he lived among them, you know what I mean? And so that becomes like the standard forest people, or the forest people. It is supposed to be the premier work, and it's pure bunk, you know? These people are the first people to give the most profound, they give the most profound definition of God, the totality of force, a part of which it distributes to everything that it creates. That's profound. And then other African civilizations come along with that. So how is it that they didn't know about God? And then some say they're the authors of monotheism, but they want to cast this in the Western light of one God, the jealous God, issuing laws, giving you books and all the rest of this stuff. This is a force. And this force is in everything that is created. And it is a pure force. And in the first show, we're talking about it's a beautiful light that's inside of each one of us. So Chua history has been reduced to this. Yet you see those who write on them now are saying, these are the most kind people you've ever seen. The most advanced in terms of the powers that they've exhibited, and we've gone through it. So what's the first phase? I call this first phase of human history, the hunter-gatherer phase, as the period of the light. It's a historical period of the light where pure humans walk this earth. Pure human beings. They call themselves pure people, and they're not arrogant. They're humble people. But they were simply describing their nature. For example, the Chua have clairvoyant powers, telepathic powers, but you don't see them using those powers in any way in a negative way, you know? So you're not going to have any Chua person with high powers, and most of them have these high powers, using them to harm anybody. And the same thing, when the Chua refer to darkness and light, here, you're not referring to daylight and darkness, but you're referring to the spiritual state of light and dark. And for them, everything is light. because for them, everything is good. And when they speak of God, there's no jealous God. There's no God that's giving you an arbitrary order and you're going to be condemned to hell if you don't follow it, like Abraham, give up your children. And by the way, your favorite child, I'm not putting down any religion. If this is what you believe, I'm not knocking it. I'm just simply saying that the Twa were in the state where they were pure spirits and their conception of God was pure. And because of that, they could radiate light. So I would say that this first period, when you look at the nature of the Twa and what the Twa contribute to the world, this is the historical period of the light where pure spirits, that is, pure humans, walked this planet Earth and walked it freely for a long period of time. And this is because being pure spirits, good people, the authors of Ma'at, because they practice it, Masouri, Maassouri, which is the root of Ma'at, which means straight and upright. That definition came from their behavior because they also set this tradition that knowing comes through being. And so the ideas that they put forward are a manifestation of their walk and of their talk, of their being. And so these pure spirits had a direct pipeline to God. If you could think of a George Washington Carver, think of a whole lot of them. You know what I mean? A whole lot of them drawn on God's power constantly and innovating advances for humanity. Morally and technically. So this enabled them to live in harmony with nature and to maintain the balance of nature, because it's not enough just to live in harmony with nature, but the role of the human being is to serve as a guardian, as a trustee, as one who, if they do anything to tweak nature, it's to help it, to help heal it, make it better. And so the Twa existed in this state, and many of them still do today, even though they've been under oppressive influences. So the key thing about the humans living in this first age of more than 100,000, we don't know exactly how long this period was, is these pure spirits had pure intentions. And when I did the opening for last week's show, I was giving some insight from a Twa elder on what happiness was. And he said it didn't come from power. He said they had tried that, meaning they had built Kemet. He said it came when you put a smile on your wife or your child's face. He said by bringing the antelope home, but doing something that would make others happy. This is what you call pure intention, not doing it for any other reason than promoting human good and human happiness. This is the first phase of human history. And so this explains why astrophysics, physics, medicine, architecture, that great Sphinx that was built in Kemet precedes dynastic Kemet and was built during the Anu age of a C.O.R.E and a Set and others. So this is the first age, the age of the light, the beautiful light. And we sing about that. We have to remember, as new Africans and Africans all over the world, the light's very important in our culture. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. We're lights. And the Twa were lights to the world, lights to humanity, lights to civilization. The second phase of history, looking at it from an African deep thought perspective, that's called philosophy, the agricultural stage was innovated by the Twa And in its first phase, these were small societies, small communities, much like the Bantu people who came in contact with the Chwa in the Niger-Congo region. And interestingly enough, in these societies, women played a very leading and prominent role because we are not into power struggles. And so there's more balance. And it's these societies have twin lineal characteristics where there's a lot of balance between males and females. But many of the early societies incline heavily towards the female. And this is indicating the humane and peaceful and caring state in which they existed. This is the period of human history also where Kemet emerges, particularly what's called pre-dynastic Kemet, 10,000 BC, when people first move into the Nile Valley, and then probably around 6,500 BC, when approximate time, I think, in which the pharaonic system begins to come into being. And this is also a period where stratification develops later in African societies because they start with village systems, systems where you have families who are living together, very often in lineage form. And as they grow, clan form. These are larger family units that hunter-gatherers didn't have. And with more stratification, more organization, then you have the emergence of kings and queens and stuff like that, which you like to identify with. And it has its positive features, but also struggles for power and stuff. But the point is, so philosophically, from the African deep thought standpoint, what stage is this? This is the stage of intentions. This is the stage where a human being is measured by their intentions. So we have a morality of intentions. It's not just a morality of physical acts that are wrong, because certainly they're wrong, but where wrong thinking is nailed as the biggest crime. And so if a man desires another woman's wife, or a woman desires another woman's husband, then the intention of adultery is the ultimate crime. And in Africa, that is confessed in ancient and traditional societies. And if intention is manifested in any way in which it can be seen, it's punished. There's a case I was reading where the king had in one nation a whole lot of wives. And one of these young men kind of desired one of them. And he put some flowers in front of her place. And that was a crime. He paid a serious penalty because it was a crime of intention. And so Africans would actually confess this. You know what I mean? Not like going to the priest and confessing to a sinner, no, to the community, saying that this crossed my mind. I thought of doing this. And we know all wrongdoing begins in intentions. So this is a noble period of human history. Noble, because people are measured by their intentions. For example, in the West, crimes are basically the physical crimes. You know what I mean? Stealing, murder, physical harm to others, and things like this. And then, of course, there are other crimes. But essentially, the physical crimes are really the serious ones. Who in the West is going to consider causing someone to cry as being an offense caused by intention? In this case, the intention of instilling fear or instilling fear in the hearts of others. I said, I know I'm guilty of this. I'm a warrior. So That really works good when you got an enemy off balance, but that is violating the law of intentions, you know. So what's the difference between this and the Twa? You know what I mean? So the Twa are the civilization of the light. They give birth to that. And then you have this period of pure intentions, you know, or of, excuse me, of intentions. What's the difference? Anytime, you know, you have to say in any society that you have to enact laws, like, for example, in Kemet, it wasn't so much a court issuing these, but you have to have a definition of wrongdoing and prohibit it. It means people are doing it. You know what I mean? You know? And so in this era of intentions, this is an era of positive and negative. You're no longer in this era of the light that's unicity, all good. This is an era where people are being encouraged to be good, to be positive, but there's a struggle against the negative. And so if you have Ma'at, truth and justice and other things, you have Isfet, I-S-F-E-T, wrongdoing. And so this particular period of intention, while noble, has two sides to it. It is still drawing from this period of pure intention. But as societies become more stratified, people gain power, and some begin to concentrate on wealth and things like that, then you begin to see poverty begin to enter the picture. You begin to see oppression begin to enter the picture. Even though in Africa, the land, air, and water was owned by no one and used by everyone. So this particular phase of history has its two sides, and I call this the period of twinness, of twin thought. And this is different from the dualistic thinking of the West, where it's either good or bad. Good is bad. Disorder is order, you know, where these two are connected. But the effort is to achieve balance and to transcend to the higher level. So the period of intentions is an important period. The period of intention was shattered, not destroyed, but shattered by the historical forces that brought on slavery, genocide, colonialism, neocolonialism, which is controlling people through the economy, through economic means, capitalism, which allows a few to have as much as they can get and take as much as you can from the many. And so the era that is ushered in by this period of oppression that we're living through right now, I call this the era of arbitrary power. Era where those who have the power do whatever they want to do. And they have the sanctity of law to back them up. And a lot of us, I don't say a lot of us, but a lot of people are even conditioned to think that if they're in the state of poverty, it's their fault, that there are things that they didn't do, when in fact the society is structured that way, you know? Or if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, it's solely your fault, you know? When in fact, again, if you're in a society in which families have been weakened, communities have been busted up, people are being thrown in jail for next to nothing, and the economy that is prevailing in a community may be illegal, and you're now in the state of depression, and so you know you go to cloud nine. I'm not saying that you have no responsibility in this, but I'm saying that the disorder in society is the bigger cause of this, and this is oppressive. And so we're in this stage where you can be walking down the street and bothering nobody and be slapped upside your head. And you could say, well, that was always the case. It's more the case now. You know, it's more the case now in an era of a choice between two cultures. And so we're now caught in the middle, as the old thing goes, under a system of nihilism or a system where there ain't no rules running. Now, a lot of people have them, but you don't know who doesn't. You know, that person that looks real nice to you, that, you know, looks like a good person, you just don't know what that person's going to do because you don't know what they've gone through. Because there's been hell to pay for a lot of people, a lot of black, brown, red, yellow, and poor people, you know, a lot of abuse and stuff like that. And so when things happen, um, it can appear to be, well, it's unintended, meaning why did it happen to me? I didn't do anything, you know. This is the error we're in. And so the error of arbitrary power. So what we have to do now is be able to take the best from our historical cultural past to transform this personally in terms of our own lives, our own identity, our own sense of peace and well-being, but as a group, as a people, in terms of transforming our families, our communities, and the society in which we live, and the world at large. So we got to draw from the best of our past to, as the rap artists say, go black to the future. And other people of color have to do the same thing. And given the nature of America, that's going to be a part of the process. But under most people of color and most people, period, you're going to find Africa popping up. Because when you have a period of history going from anywhere from 144,000 to 2 to 300,000 years, then that's what you call formative history. People have had certain ingrained behavior patterns, certain ingrained family patterns, certain ingrained internal psychological patterns that it's going to be in you. And that's what's enabled us to survive, not just the Twa, but the deep thought coming out of African history and African culture, and other people of color have that as well in their own history. So for African people, people of color, and those that want to restore a sense of humanity, we need to go back to the best of our historical, philosophical, spiritual, political, social, economic, artistic, scientific past, draw from the best of that. And by the way, New African culture has done that. The very spirit foundation of this culture is part of that. It is the biggest part of that. The fact that family is so central in our culture, even though two-parent households have been severely weakened. Still, the force of family, the fact that kindness and humanness is so central to the being of our people that we still can draw from that. And so this is what we've got to draw from and remake it. We're not going back to hunter-gatherer. We're not going back to Kemet. We're not going back to the Yoruba. I'm into Ifa, but it's just, I haven't been initiated, but I draw from it and it's very helpful. But I'm not living in 2000 BC. I'm living now. But we need to take the best of the past and transform it into the present and into the future. And I'm a revolutionary. A lot of people who call themselves revolutionaries are coming from a Western framework. And so that Western framework sounds revolutionary because you got a few humanistic things you're going to do, like lighten poverty or eliminate it. But when it comes to the overall view, you're not stepping out of what's caused the oppression, which is this Aryan worldview, and not just what's called white supremacy or racism. Those are things we'll get into much later. The book I'm working on now is focusing centrally on that. So a lot of us think, oh, this past doesn't have anything to do with the present. You are your past. And what you don't know about your past, positive or negative, that's what you can relive. And too often it'll be negative if you don't know the story, because the society is pushing you in that direction. And so we need to draw from this deep well of our people's historical, cultural, spiritual past so that we can renew ourselves and recreate better people and a just society. And that's long and short term. So what I'm going to do is look at the Chwa presence in Europe, in the Americas, and in Asia. But I'm not going to go according to historical order, and I'm linear. Obatala is my Orisha, and it's the only linear Orisha. Orisha is a spirit in the Yoruba system, and it represents different forces. Obatala was the oldest of the spirits that came from heaven to earth, and the only one that had one wife. He mandated it for all the other Orishas, and they said, hell no. Oh, no. I'm representing God. You know what I mean? I got to have more than one. You know what I mean? But Obatala's linear, and I tend to be linear. But on this one, I'm not following the linear sequence when I deal with the migration patterns of the Chwa into Europe, the Americas, and Asia. And in fact, if I was going to go linear, I'd start with Asia. I'm going to do Asia last when it comes to the migration patterns, though Asia was the first place that Africans migrated to. So the key point here is one, showing that the Chwa were the first people in all the geographical regions of the world, but also showing some of the contributions that they made to bringing light to these areas, to these people, and raising up civilization as they did in the Niger-Congo Bantu region, or to the Bantu people. So the first migrations to Asia occurred around 50,000 BC, according to Sheikh Anta Diop and many other Africans. And I'll get into that later. But the first migrations of Africans to Europe occurred during what's called the Upper Paleolithic period, the Upper Stone Age period, where Africans were doing chip stone and making tools out of stone. And so that migration occurred between 40 and 35,000 BC, 40 to 35,000 BC, of Africans migrating from Africa to Europe, the place we call Europe today. It didn't have that name then. The term Europe is a recent name and a recent concept. So guess who the first people were among Africans who migrate to Europe? They were the first people who came into being. The Kung people, K-U-N-G, or also known as San people. And these are people who spoke with a click. And we find in particularly the Americas evidence of click speakers going back to the first people in the Americas. And I'm sure the same is true in Europe. Now, the Kung people conform to the conclusions made by mitochondrial DNA that they're the first human beings. And their rock art, which are drawings in caves that have spirit power, are found all over Africa and all over the world, but particularly Chwa rock art traces their migrations out of Africa into Europe during this Upper Paleolithic period. And they've used various kinds of radioactive dating methods. One's called the argon dating method, ARGON, to confirm these migrations. See, I like to do this because I like to have my stuff solid. I'm not going and somebody said, yeah, what's the basis? And I'm into God basis too, you know what I mean? Because when God gives you something, you can confirm it. But I'm also into backing stuff up. So, by the way, I want to stress that the two main sources that I'll be drawn from today is my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, and the book by Dr. David Imhotep, The First Americans Were Africans. The First Americans Were Africans, and this is his expanded, revised edition. I would have liked to have had him on the show, but he's not able to do that, and so I got his permission to cite some references from him. I have to give him praise. This is the best work that's been done on this subject. And then he had the discipline to go out and add some stuff based on new research. And we had him on a month or two ago dealing with Muhammad Ali. So these are the two primary sources that I'm going to draw from when I'm doing this analysis of the Chwa moving into different parts of the world and bringing civilization there. Now, people who have covered this area should already know the first people to migrate out of Africa to Europe have been called Grimaldi, Grimaldi. They call them Grimaldi man, Grimaldi man and woman. This is the group of people who are Kung, who were the first to migrate into Europe. Later, long after the Chwa migrate, taller Africans migrate later, but it's the Chwa who we find as the first people all over the planet. Now, you might say, why would you leave warm Africa to go to Europe? Why would you leave a place that's plentiful and all the things you need in hunter-gatherer life, especially, and go to Asia or go to America? Why would you do that? And I'm not getting into it today. Alaska. Why would you do that? I don't have the answer for that. I don't know why people migrated from areas of the earth, in particular Africa, that provided pretty well for them. There are probably a lot of reasons. I don't have the answer for that. But what I do know is that they saw the need to move throughout the planet. And probably one of the reasons is that they wanted to investigate other parts of the earth. And then having higher mind powers, they may have known a few things about what could happen through that. So, but I don't know the specifics of exactly why, but particularly why during the Ice Age. And so what we do know about the migration that occurs then around 40,000 BC is that there's a period of time in which things warm up in Europe, what today is called Europe. And so Africans make that move, and they may have not even intended to stay there. They may have been going somewhere else, but they make that move. And then as things get colder, they find themselves trapped in this ice age. And so as a result, you see a transformation of Black, brown people into white people as a result of this long period of living in a cold climate. And there's a whole lot of technical stuff that I'm not going to go into, but we know generally that in this cold climate, what ends up happening is that the absorption of ultraviolet rays in a dark skin is advantageous in a hot climate. But when you get into a cold climate, then what ends up happening is there's a transformation that occurs from dark to white, especially when the diet produces very little vitamin D. And so white skin is necessary in high latitudes where it's cold. And so those that don't make that adaptation will die out. And so you have the emergence of what you call white pigmentation as a result of that. So Cro-Magnon man, Cro-Magnon, is what emerges out of this. And Cro-Magnon man is the one that emerges out of this transformation of black or brown to white, and is the ancestor of modern Europeans. The Basque people, Basque, are the direct descendants of Cro-Magnon man, according to Sheikhanna Diop. So what you then have is successive waves of Kung Twa people migrating into Europe. And then when whites come into being, you have them beginning to populate these areas, and some of them reaching northeastern Europe, where the Kung Twa people had lived for an extremely long time. So what happens when these newly created people begin to move on this landscape that we now call Europe? It's the Twa, the Kung, who are the compass and the guide to civilization for them. And in the case of the Scandinavian people, the Vikings in particular, who become a scourge on Britain, the shores of some parts of Europe for a long period of time, people who moved by the sea and waged war on the land, looking for better land than the ice lands they come out of. They're first introduced to the art of sailing on the seas by the Twa. Did you know that? Huh? So a guy named Paul Ross Washington, in a book called The African Egyptian Heritage of the Vikings, reveals that Twa women served as boat guides for the Vikings, taking them into new regions that they knew nothing about. You have a picture also that this guy, Paul Washington, presents of a boatload full of Vikings with a black man guiding them. You know what I mean? These are areas they don't know. The Twa have been there for a long time. They're the first people there. The Kung people, the Twa people, according to Dr. David Imhotep, taught the Vikings how to build their first ships and to master seafaring skills. I'm sure they didn't teach them plundering, but they taught them the art of navigation, and they tried to bring them into some lighter civilization. And one of the things about all these early Europeans is they were into spirit stuff before Christianity comes along. They just using spirit stuff for power and also for survival, because they're also dealing in some harsh climates, but they're for power. So this is important that shipbuilding. They're learning that from the Chua. The Kung people taught the white Vikings how to use snow sleighs, sleighing, sleighing on the snow. Black people today are all about, I'm not into any snow. It's too cold for me. Well, that's true. I'm that way. But the fact of the matter is, the Twa were in all climates, and they were civilizing people who were in very rough circumstances. And so in the Oslo Museum in Norway, you have pictures of Viking sailing stuff. This right here is a Viking sleigh that was made by the Twa. And then what we find also is that because the Kung were so central in terms of teaching them seafaring skills, in this same museum, you have the picture of two Twa women, and then you can see one on a horse. This is on the side of a sleigh, which is telling you they probably built it, and they were certainly central to its operation. And if you notice, the women are small, and they have cornrows on their head, sisters. Now, the German researcher, there's a guy named Max Planck. He's from the Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. By the way, I hope people take notes on this because I know I'm giving you a lot of detail. I hope you've been taking some notes over the time. When it comes to who these people were, the first people in Europe, this guy, Max Planck, says this. He says, DNA results probably suggest that early Europeans were dark and evolved their light skin pigmentations separately, with different genes contributing to the pigmentation of the Caucasoid and Mongoloid. In other words, the first people were black. Now, another person that I'm drawing from, not as much from, but who's done some important work on this is Dr. Clyde Ahmed Winters, a noted expert on ancient African history and linguistics. Dr. Winters has not been given the respect he deserves. He's written extensively, particularly on the presence of Africans in Asia, but he's also written on African history as well. He's written a lot, and he's also a linguist, brilliant brother. And he also confirms that using a variety of skills, research skills, that Europe had the presence of the Kung there before any other people, and they were the first people in America as well. And what he does is, using DNA, he shows that the DNA makeup of the people who are the first in Europe and the first in the Americas make up the M and Y chromosome R. And this is the same DNA makeup of the Kung people. Now, that's important. Now, again, this is because I said on this show I was going to give you a lot of different evidence for supporting the first presence of any people in the Americas or in Europe or in Asia being black. So one is DNA. Another is mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA of the mother. And also blood groupings. And what's interesting is O negative blood is the oldest blood, and it derives from Kung hunter-gatherers. And this blood grouping traces back to the first human beings. Blood type O is considered the universal blood type. Why? Because any people of any other blood type can use it. This is showing through blood type, supporting what we already know through history, linguistics, art, and other things, that the Twa are the mothers and fathers of humanity. The blood type is showing, this is the mother of blood types and the father of blood types. And so any other person of a different blood type can take this O negative blood type, because you're going back to the root. The same is true of mitochondrial DNA, which is again supporting the Twa as the first people, the mothers and fathers of humanity. And so when you're tracing the root of DNA, the Y chromosome tree is the father of the DNA tree. Mitochondrial DNA is the mother. Now, the father, Y chromosome, has the first three branches of Y1, 2, and 3. And all other DNA branches, Asian, European, Native American, which has a heavy Asian and African mix that we'll get into in a minute, they followed the chromosome 4 through 10. 4 through 10 are traced back to 1 through 3, Y chromosome. So what DNA confirms, and what history shows us as well, is that the first humans were Africans. The first Africans were Kung, hunter-gatherer, and DNA, mitochondrial, and DNA itself confirms that. Everything falls in line. If this isn't enough proof of Twa origins of humanity, mitochondrial DNA, the DNA of the mother, not of the individual, tells us that the first humans were African Twa. African mitochondrial DNA has 3 branches, L1 through L3. The lineage L is the source of the Asian, European, and Native American lineages. So again, when you go to mitochondrial DNA, what you've got is the mother of it is African, the children of it are Asian, European, Native Americans, who are often mixed with Mongolian and African, and some European too. I don't even know if I'm going to get a chance to go into that today. So dealing with the Twa origin of humanity in Europe, the Twa were the first in Scotland. And when the whites arrived there, they called the Twa Pixies, Pixies. The British called them Picts, Picts. The Twa or Picts were smart enough to live apart from these Scottish Highlanders who came in much later. They preserved their own culture, they preserved their own language, and because of conflicts with the Scots, they went to war. Now, see, the Twa are peaceful people, but they ain't fools. So in 81 CE, a war occurred between the Picts and the Celts, Picts and Celts. The Picts are Twa, the Celts are white. Guess who won? The Pits, baby, Pits. The little people won. And for some time, they controlled 1/3 of what became England. Did y'all know that? I don't know why y'all wanted it, but once you're there, you got to defend your stuff. You hear me? Huh? So later, the Picts are absorbed because you've got more whites continually coming in. So it wasn't that they were conquered later. That's just what's happening through absorption. That happens also in other places, in some other places. Now, I pointed out before, the Chua phase of civilization is the stage of the light. And one of the key concerns about Chua civilizers is astrophysics. Why? Because as the Chua said, God is Ilani, Illani. It is the force that lights the stars and that gives life to the world, Ilani. They also associated with vibratory power and vibratory force and other things. So stellar power was important for a lot of reasons, but because you live in the material world, a lot of you are afraid of astrology, for example. You don't understand everything God created has a spirit component, and the stellar region of the highest and most powerful order. All those stars and planets up there have energy fields. This is one of my specialties, and I can tell you, I know more about myself because of astrology than anything else, particularly characteristics, destiny, because that's basically what that is. So when the ancients, the ones of the light, set up megaliths in Kemet, like what I talked about a few weeks ago, Nocta Playa. And this is the picture of the megaliths found at Nocta Playa, which is near Giza. And those 1, 2, 3, those 3 circles, that's Orion. And then it's taking it through its phases of 26,000, nearly 26,000 years of the precession of the equinoxes. And so when Africans set up these megalith systems, they were doing it for star observation because they understood what was happening up there had an effect down here. And as a historian, I pointed this out before, I've taught classes on ancient Kemet using precessional cycles. And then, of course, what actually happened during those periods. It is the best system for getting into the psychology of a particular period, the mentality of a particular period, the deep thought of a particular period. So these megaliths found in Nocta Playa in Kemet, they measured, as I pointed out before, the orbit of Orion, and they had different patterns, those stones laid out in different patterns, showing their circuit at different times, some going back 6,000 some odd BC to 16,500 BC. Now, the Chua brought this megalith system to Britain. Stonehenge is a megalith system created by the Chua. And on the promotional leaflet that we did, you have a picture of Stonehenge where the green is. Those are the stones arranged around. And so they brought their astronomical system there. And by the way, the Nocta Playa stones lay out pretty much the pattern for the circuit of Orion that would be used when the pyramids were built in the 3rd dynasty on in Kemet, in Giza, that's not far from Nocta Playa. Now, in the case of the Chua in Britain, who build this megalith system in Britain called Stonehenge, which are these stones arranged around this circle. Ivan van Sertima, in one of his editions on African history that he put out, a number of them, and Runoko Rashidi played a role as co-editor of some of them. He did a series called African Presence in Early Europe. And I have all of his books, and these are really outstanding. If you don't have them, you should get them. And so he notes on page 14, this is what he says. he's quoting an expert in this field. Quote, "We don't know the names of the builders of Stonehenge, but we're pretty sure it wasn't the Celts or the Druids. The Celts and Druids were white. Druids were a class of learned men and women in Celtic society. But when Stonehenge was built, the Druids, the Celts, were not in Britain. Some historians of the British Isles point out the original inhabitants of these isles were not only non-Celtic and non-Teutonic, another branch of Europeans, and linguistically, they were allied with the people who spoke a non-Aryan language. Anytime you hear that, you know they're talking about Africans 9 out of 10 times, usually. If you're talking about the people who precede the Romans, the Etruscans, they'll say the same thing. There are two things you'll note. They'll say they don't speak our language, and then they'll say they treat women real good. You know you're dealing with something African right there. So he goes on to make this statement that they're not speaking the Aryan language. He says, a study of the original Celts by Squire, this is another author, goes even further. Now they're going to describe what they look like. These people were short, dark-skinned, dark-eyed, and dark-haired, boldly stating that their language belonged to a class that came originally from Africa. Well, when you add to that African speaking, you add to the size, you got Kum, Chwa. They're the people that were already there anyway, understand? And they were simply carrying this civilization of the light into Europe. You hear me? But it became a mystery to the later inhabitants who come in. They're wondering, what is this? Particularly the more recent inhabitants that occupy it now. Now, the historians can say it wasn't them, but a lot of them don't want to buy into it. So this is a part of the Chwa civilizing project in Europe. Now, Dr. Imhotep, in his work, First Americans Were Africans, he talks about the migration of Africans into America. I do in my book, but his is more extensive. And I think his work is to be commended, and you should read his book if you haven't already. If you read the first one, you need to read the second one for the updating he's done on it. So he and other historians prove that the commonly held belief that the first Americans came from Asia and Australia to America, the first ones that came to America came from Asia and Australia, is wrong. And there's a lot of different reasons for this, but I'm going to cut through the best evidence. If you can get sophisticated and read more on this, I got more, but I'll give you the very best stuff. So the key thing is there were two migrations, major migrations to America from the outside. One to America. One were Paleo people, Paleo Africans who migrate to the Americas, Stone Age people. So this is real early. And then later waves of Kung people, and then taller people later who are bringing in Neolithic agriculture, and then high civilization, the Olmecs in America, which is the mother civilization of America, though it's not just African. It's got Native American in it. It's led by Africans. In the back, you'll see a picture. It's on my left, so it'd probably be your right. Well, it's a picture of an Olmec head, an African face. That's an Olmec head. These are the founders of Mesoamerican civilization. Mayan, Aztec, Toltec, Inca. This research has been done by Ivan van Sertima. They came before Columbus. The classic work on this. I'm not focusing on this today. I'm dealing with the Chua. These come after. And Ivan van Sertima locates this period to the 25th dynasty of Kemet because that's the period when step pyramids were built again. And that's what the Olmecs introduce and the Mayans take up. And by the way, whenever the Mayans built a pyramid, they would always have a body of water around it, which is again showing another Kemetic influence, which is the noon, the watery mass. So you have two waves of migrations of people into the Americas. One is Paleo-Africans, and then subsequent waves following them of Neolithic or agricultural Africans. And then you have the migration of Mongoloid people. The Mongoloid people time period dates to around 7,000 to 5,000 BC. So that is fairly recent when you're dealing with a time period going back to 40,000 BC as the period in which the first migrations out of Africa occur, and then a later period, but still ancient for America. So to make this simple, because I go through a whole lot of stuff which Dr. Imhotep goes through, but I found something that's not in his book, so I'm going to cut to the chase. You know what I mean? This best evidence, you know, and I'm going to use that. So in my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, I make a certain citation, but I first of all want to deal with a conclusion by a French anthropologist whose last name is Guidon, director of the American Man Foundation. His research institute concluded that the first humans came to northeastern Brazil and the Caribbean from Africa. And he used a bunch of different dating methods to show that this goes back as far as 100,000 years ago. So the first presence of people in the Americas is in the Americas, and it comes from Africa, 100,000 years ago. So in my book, Integration Trap, Generation Gap, what I do is go through some research done in Brazil by a man named Walter Neves, Neves. He's an anthropologist. He worked at the University of Sao Paulo, and he concluded this. He said, quote, "We can no longer say that the first colonizer," and you see, I don't like this word colonizer, connecting this to the Chua. This makes no sense, but let me read this whole thing. "We can no longer say that the first colonizers of the Americas came from North Asia, as previous models have proposed." He went on to say, quote, "that this skeleton is nearly 2,000 years older than any skeleton ever found in the Americas and does not look like those of American Indians or North Asians." Now I'll show you a picture of this. Those of you that don't have the Integration Trap book, I'll show you the picture in just a minute. So when they reconstructed the head of the earliest human remain that they found in South America, in the Americas, they renamed this person Luzia and dated it back to 11,500 years ago. And she was an African, 4 feet tall, hunter-gatherer, coon or Chua. So let me just show you a picture of this beautiful lady right here. You can see that. That's her. That's a reconstruction of her. Picture's best evidence. So Luzia is in Brazil 11,500 years ago. It doesn't mean that there weren't Africans there before, but this is the best evidence and best proof of the African presence in the Americas preceding the Mongoloid presence, which was 7,000 to 5,000 BC, a lot earlier than that presence. And so again, they're bringing their notions of civilization to the Americas. Subsequent waves of Mongolians would come in, and they came in much larger groups. And so in terms of blood groupings, over time, they're overwhelming this African presence. But the first presence in America is in Africa, coming from Africa, and are Kung or Chwa. And what you're seeing is they brought in their culture, a spirit-based culture, a culture that is based heavily on divination and priestly system that we find in the Mesoamerican high cultures and high civilizations, Aztecs, Mayans, Toltecs, Incas. They bring in a twin mentality. When you look at the Toltecs, who were supplanted by the Aztecs, their ideas of duality is very similar to the mentality that comes out of Africa. And so there's a philosophy and a way of life that the Chwa bring in to the Americas. What I want to do when I deal now with Asia is just focus on one people, which are the Chinese. But I want to note that you find the Anu, A-I-N-U, all over Asia, and specifically in Japan and the Philippines and in other parts of Asia. And I've had, while I was teaching at State, exchange students, some of which come from the Philippines, and one from Japan. And they've given me invaluable information about the Anu presence in Japan. The Anu are the original, A-I-N-U, the original inhabitants of Japan. The people who are in Japan now are Asians who migrate there. Many say from Korea, but the native inhabitants are Anu. And these Anu are the same people who found ancient Kemet, and the same people that found the civilization in China. And the same is true in the Philippines. Now, in China, Chinese historians have noted that the first people in China were Anu. Going back approximately 50,000 years ago, you have the first Anu or Kung presence in Asia. There's a Chinese historian, his name is K.C. Wu, W-U, and he wrote a book called Chinese Heritage. And in this is what he says. You see why I left this for last, you know. He talks about the female-centeredness of the first societies in China brought in by Africans. He says, and he called them matriarchal, but I'm going to qualify this, and his own description will make it clear why that's necessary. But he's right in that these are societies where women are central. And so he says this appears to be borne out in China by the fact that surnames all had their characters formed with the pictorial symbol woman as a radical, meaning you're descended from a woman. Among the Anu people, wives were called equals. as equals, they ordered their men to fetch water and carry wood. And so, as equals, they played a central role in Chinese civilization. Now, the fact that they call themselves equals would indicate that they were not matriarchs, but the society inclined towards them. I would call them twinlineal, that they had twinlineal societies balanced between males and females. And as a result of the C.O.R.E imprint and then subsequent African cultural imprints, the first two dynasties of China were African, Xia and Shang. You then have introduced the yin-yang male-female complementary principle into Chinese philosophy and Chinese culture. So China, in its early phase, was a phase where there was great respect for women, and it was a phase of peace, great deal of peace. Now that changes, and China becomes patriarchal, male-oriented. But there are residuals left in Chinese culture of female power, and a lot of it has to do with the power they have in the household. But they underwent oppression under the patriarchal system that comes in as the Asians come in and take the place of the C.O.R.E. So China, also the Chinese philosophers and historians note that the age of the hunter-gatherer, that the hunter-gatherer introduced, and then the agrarian societies, the Anu period that follows it, is an age of uprightness, of good character, where many people, particularly highly empowered people, had connection with the spirit world and lived a life of truth and justice. And as a result of that, harmony was maintained. And so the people of the light from Africa brought this light of civilization to Asia, to Europe, and to the Americas. So in conclusion, the C.O.R.E were the first people in America, Asia, and Europe. They developed balanced societies in Africa, and they brought those balanced societies of kindness and justness and a high civilizational order to the world. So the C.O.R.E stage of civilization was brought to every corner of the world. And it shaped a justness up to a certain point in certain parts of the world. And then we see people moving down different paths for power and for developing stratified societies that are defined exclusively as civilization. That is, people who live in cities and highly stratified societies. But the C.O.R.E without high stratification in their societies, without kings or queens and without armies, though they were capable of defending themselves when they had to, brought to every corner of the world a cultural unity. And then out of this, humanity springs, and then different civilizations and different cultures develop over time. And so if we're to take a society that's upside down and oppressed in terms of carrying out oppression on other people, people of color, Black people, Native American people of color, and the poor of the planet, then we need some visions that offer an alternative. And it doesn't mean we'll reproduce those in the society that we recreate. It means that we take the best of those and reapply them to our reality today. And I think that the spirit nature of the culture of the C.O.R.E is embedded in all African cultures and in the cultures of people of color. And it is the truth for all people. We are spirit beings having a physical experience. So drawing on the power of the spirit is key, and it has sustained us in this reality, in the US and in the Western Hemisphere and throughout the world, and especially in Africa. This twin lineal family model that I haven't gone into in depth, and I will at another time, the balance system of the interplay between masculine and feminine and the balance between males and females is the most just family system known to humanity. And it is one that we need to revisit and adapt to our reality today. And I think it's key to revitalizing African communities globally, African American communities in the United States, and African communities in the Caribbean, and villages and in cities in Africa. And it is key as providing a model for transforming your system of governance to one in which the people have maximum participation in an age in which the demographics are shifting, the cultural paradigms have to shift. And we're seeing all of this stuff on the curriculum that is coming out today, critical race theory. Pure false stuff being used by the Republicans so that they can mobilize people, white people at the voting polls to scare them, when in fact this is not being taught in the public schools. And in fact, African American, Native American, the histories of people of color need to be taught in the public schools. But at a time in which whites are numerically in decline, this is a part of their defensive posture designed to create false issues that they can rally people around to get out the vote, ultimately to put Trump back in the White House. So we're at a period of the shift of numbers in this country from white to black, brown, red, and yellow. And with that comes a shift of paradigm. But the beginning of that paradigm is applying it to ourselves. We don't have to wait until a society falls or collapses for us to begin to build just societies, because they start within ourselves. So the C.O.R.E provide a master model for that. As I pointed out before, Black Lives Matter, their system of group-centered leadership, it basically originates from hunter-gatherer and then is carried into classless age-grade societies, where societies are run without leaders. Everyone has a say-so. And literally today, the age of singular leadership is over, because the problems are too complex for single leaders to solve. King reached his high point in 65. We had the discussion with Menu Ampin on King. King's movement, it wasn't just King, but his movement had great successes, voter rights and the ending of segregation. But by 65, he ran into a roadblock. No more successes. Why? Because that model of leadership and that approach to getting things done, which was basically get your head whipped, the media would publicize it and would force the government to pass legislation. That didn't apply to the North, where entrenched white power exists as it does in the South. And different methods have to be used in the North and now in the South. And one of the most important is spread your leadership out. Have as many as you possibly can. They're doing this in the Sudan right now. We'll see how it works, because they're going up against a brutal military regime, And they had mass protests in Egypt, but it was, going up against, again, a tough military system that, repressed them. And so in Africa, you have movements for change, trying to end corrupt leadership in different parts of Africa. But in the end, if Pan-Africanism is going to become a reality in the world, and if Africa is ever going to unite, it's going to have to come from the people, from the bottom up. I was chair of the political committee, 6th Pan-African Congress. And one of the lessons I learned was held in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. When there's the introduction to this show, you'll see a black and white photograph of three people, me with a natural on, Amiri Baraka on one side, and a guy named Owusu Sadakawe on the other. That was a debate we had on Pan-Africanism versus Marxism. In this case, I would say dogmatic Marxism. And I thought that Imamu Baraka was on my side. He's a great poet, but he had just shifted to Maoism, and it was a very dogmatic form. So I'm sandwiched between these two. I taped that. I have a copy of it. In fact, it was printed. I got a little print of the outcome. I'll just say I didn't lose that debate because I studied Marx. You know, I always say I'm not anti-Marxist, but I ain't no Marxist. And part of the problem is Marx didn't study anything outside of Europe. He definitely didn't study Africa. The Iroquois Confederacy, he got that through Morgan, you know, the state, the family, and private property. So how can you have a revolution and the old family structure is still intact, which is the foundation for any society? If it's corrupt, everything else is going to be in a weak state. You know what I mean? So going black to the future is a necessity for us, but I would say residuals, serious residuals of twin lineal family things have been carried to the Americas, carried to the United States. We need to be conscious of that, work on that so that we develop more balance in our family systems. But I note, because the research I've been doing on this shows that the best family systems we have going on in this country, and we got a whole lot of them, a lot of families that work well, there's that interplay between the masculine and the feminine, between the males and the females. And there's a mutuality of respect for each. And it doesn't really matter how it works in the sense that there's just one system, because whatever provides balance in a relationship is what will work. And that's specific to each family or each relationship. I know some of you ain't into family no more because of the way you've been hit by these external forces. So there's much that we can draw from our past. And I'm not just limiting this to the Chua. I'm focusing on this because it's been neglected. But we need to draw from this deep heritage that we have and this new African culture that we've created to revitalize it and strengthen it, to move forward in the future. So I hope you got something out of these 4 different parts of the series on God, the superlative light, and the Chua, the light of the world, the light of civilization. So I hope you got something out of it. Hotep. Let's see what we got here in terms of comments and questions. Lao Tzu. Oh, this is a question of somebody else. Brother Ugawa, could you explain further how the Anu contributed to the philosophy of China and how that philosophy is connected to Chua spirit-based philosophy? In the Hsia dynasty of China, which is the first dynasty, where you're now in the agrarian period, these are not Chua. These are the Africans who grow out of the Chua but have been heavily influenced by them. The emperor's wife, who's also his sister, they practiced the same thing that they did in Kemet, a royal incest, which is not good. But it was the emperor's sister who imparted to him the yin-yang philosophy. The yin-yang philosophy is a natural outgrowth of hunter-gatherer societies that have been male-female based for a couple of 100,000 years. And it's a male-female, masculine-feminine principle. The I Ching, which is the great spiritual book of China, which is a divination book that is going back again to the Anu period, because divining is key in all African systems. The Yoruba, the Asante, the Dogon, all African systems divination by various means, and the Chinese there. So this is the I Ching, I-C-H-I-N-G, is the greatest spirit text of China. And Confucius, who had problems with the spirit, because Confucius comes along during the contending state period, where you had warring states going against each other. So Confucius said, respect the spirits and keep your distance. In other words, he knew there was something called spirits, but he was more the rational man dealing with character, which is the system of Confucianism. But in the last years of his life, he spent the last years of his life annotating the I Ching, meaning going back to the roots. And so those roots are, again, African, that spirit base. Worley Smith, the time for singular leadership is over. Spread the leadership strategy must come through discussion and dialogue, mutuality and balance, thanks to the Chua on their pure light. Yeah, that's real key. Now, you're going to still have states with leaders as long as you have these states. But you see, another problem that Africa faces, that African people in the world faces, you're using the European leadership model, the very notion of state. What does that mean in the European model? The institutions of violence. That's basically what the state is. That's the police, that's the army, that's your spy system. And they always present these as protecting you from external forces. When, in the case of the United States, this country hasn't been invaded by anybody other than Europeans, who invaded it and took it from the Native Americans, and then took half of Mexico, the northern half. You know what I mean? So they don't really need much of an army, and they have the oceans that protect them and everything else. And with nuclear weapons, as long as one has it, it's going to be hard for the other one to drop it on the one that has one. That's why they ain't dropped nothing on Russia. So this notion of state is those who have the power, and now it's military power, uses it to keep the people under control. Yet Africa maintained nations without armies for thousands of years. I made this comment on another show, and someone came up and started citing all these facts. Not until the coming of the Arabs and until the coming of the Europeans, and in Kemet, the Hyksos, did you need these standing armies, you know? And what's the main reason for the state serving as an instrument of control? And then you get this process of electing a president who's supposed to be the head of the state, but the president doesn't really head the state. It's the people who run the economy. And also in certain countries, like in Africa, the people with the guns, who are also marching to the orders of the people who control the global economy. And so we need to reconfigure this whole idea of state, throw it out the window, and take the best of African governance systems so that maximum power goes into the hands of the people. But that also goes back to other things like, should the land be privately owned? What about the air and the water? Should you be paying for water for people who are living on $1 or $2 a day, or for anybody? Should you? Who got the right to have the water? It was God's gift. Why isn't it shared? So I think part of the question is adapting communal models, which is sharing economic models, to our reality today. In the US, it's hard because you've got private property that is the rule of the land. And then Africa has often picked this up, sometimes with 99-year leases. In Tanzania, if you buy land, you have it for 99 years. So that's kind of like a compromise between communalism and private property. But 99 years, pretty much, that's probably well past the lifetime of a buyer of property. So there's a lot of things that we need to, revisit, when it comes to transformation. Now, the thing is with Africans in America, Africans throughout the world, one of the things that has sustained us is through our humanism, our sharing spirit. So we've had a communal spirit. we couldn't just go and sit on the land and share it, but in some families, people could own enough, among blacks, could own enough land and then share it among family members, or sharing the resources from the land, or sharing some of our wealth, helping our people out and helping humanity out. So this is adapting our culture to these new realities. But in the end, there's some things that just need to go. Question to Shaka, did you cover the climate conditions in the Sahara when the Sphinx was built? No, because this wasn't a discussion on the Sphinx. But yeah, it appears that there was water. It was not desert. And it was built way before dynastic Kemet. And since we know the people who set up what's called pre-dynastic Kemet or ancient Kemet were Chwa, we can assume that they were the builders of it. And so there's plenty of evidence of water around the Sphinx that indicates it was built under different climatic conditions. Okay, let's see what else we have. I would encourage anyone watching the show that hasn't subscribed to subscribe. And if you can, make a donation, because I need to raise some money so I can hire a person who's good at recruiting subscribers. Let's see. Okay, question from Ugawa. Are you going to lecture here on the Kemet and the precessional cycles, connecting those cycles to the present state of the world? One of these days. Of course, I'm dealing with people that don't even like astrology. They've been brainwashed on that. So we're going to go to precessions. But yeah, I'm going to do it, but I don't know when. Lady Mosley, how you doing, lady? Would it be considered natural selection as they began to adapt for survival in colder climates from warmer? I don't buy natural selection. I don't buy it. That's the Western European explanation of that. But so could it be then being to adapt from survival in colder climates from warmer? They definitely did have to adapt. That's for sure. And over a period of time, then you have a transformation of people in terms of color, and then later that translates into culture. So adaptation definitely had to take place, and under cruel conditions, particularly when you're living under the Ice Age. Hissat Menhir, what are your thoughts about Genesis tracing the ancestors of modern man back to the San people of South Africa? Yeah, I already said that. And mitochondrial DNA conclusively establishes that. And not only in terms of mitochondrial DNA, but linguistically as well, because that click language that's been found in the Americas and in Europe, that's the oldest language in the world. And apparently, if you lose it, you can't regain it. And then I know a lot of South Africans are click speakers. So they're influenced by the click. So my name, I'm not going to do this right. My name, Tashaka, in click is Shaka, Shaka. But the whole language has got that. I know if you're from South Africa, you know that. So yeah, mitochondrial DNA clearly establishes that. Oh, Brother Shabazz, 1%. Good for you. Timra Kepru, during the time the climate may have been drastically different. Yeah, definitely. P.A.P.O, yes, it has been claimed that there are multiple universes. Watch a Carl Sagan documentary, The Farthest from Earth, on Netflix, based on a NASA orbit study. Well, it makes sense that there are multiple universes. just because of the vastness of this universe, it makes sense that there would be others. The Dogon talk about 10, but they don't mean 10. They mean many. But it's generally assumed by astrophysicists that there are other universes. And yet to be physically proved, but this constellation that we live in, governed by the Milky Way, is so vast, we still don't know enough about it. But there's, yeah, I think that that's very true. K.A.P.O, in Kemet, coming forth by day, meaning righteous living before death. Is it similar to the Twa's righteous belief on how to live? Yeah, it's kind of like it's drawing from this period of the light, and it's measuring you according to very high standards. So they often call these coming forth by day or negative confessions, saying, I did not commit adultery. I did not steal, you know. But these are not laws. These are not like commandments because they're all carried out under one mantra: speak truth, do truth. And so you know what those truths are. And so the 42 assessors, when you're going through the afterlife, each one is checking you out on one of those. Now, in parapsychology, I've mentioned this before, that's stored in your ka. And your ka is your memory of everything that's happened in this lifetime. It's also your spirit double. And so when you pass to the other side, there's an immediate review, a life review that occurs in milliseconds because you're outside of space, outside of time. I've mentioned this before. And everything that you've done to other human beings, positive or negative, is experienced. And it's a weighing period. And so what they had in Kemet, which was measuring your heart against an ostrich feather, which against Ma'at, and your heart is the seat of your Ka, of your destiny, what you did on this earth, that's judgment. And so the 42 assessors are, specifying those things that you need to do right to get by. Now, I think to be fair, that weighing is a weighing of positive against negative. And so to get into the heavenly realm, the positive's got to outweigh the negative. I don't think that the requirement for getting into heaven is that you be of the pure spirit that the Chwa were and still are in many cases, because there ain't nobody getting in, or hardly. I mean, there will be some that shine so much, but they'll still have flaws. So that's my opinion, that it's a weighing, and it's a question of which comes out higher or lower. And then what happens when it's almost even? That's a good question. Lao Tzu. Is it possible that for the Chua, this is not the only form of reality? For example, there is an idea of multiple universes, multiple Earths existing simultaneously. Yes, a brother from South Africa asked the same question below the thing when you're going back to the show after it's been broadcast. He was asking, could we live in more dimensions than one at the same time? And he's asking this of physical being, because we know spirits can be in multiple dimensions at the same time. At least it's said, and I believe that's true. So it's possible that they could. Certainly, we know as human beings, when you're doing astral projection, those that have that gift, and your spirit, your soul is going to another realm, and you see things in the past or in the future, you're outside of space and outside of time. And I was given the example of Fool's Crow, the great holy man from the Lakota. And when he's traveling to heaven, it's his identical being, which would be his Ba, which is the soul that can go to the past or to the future. In milliseconds, maybe less than that, he's flying past stars and everything else. So that's an experience of being outside of space and outside of time. Can you do it in other ways? I don't know. It's possible. I don't know. You know, I'm not saying no. I'm not saying yes. I don't know. You know. Lao Tzu. Since the Twa possessed extrasensory perceptions, would they not have seen that living in the forest would lead eventually to the suppression of their way of life? Not all forest dwellers have been suppressed, but you're right. Many have. In Uganda, the president of Uganda required that all of the Twa be pulled out of the forest and had nothing for them. And that's their way of life, you know. Well, let's put this question this way. Could they have foreseen that for 250,000 years or whatever the number was, they would live in the most just societies on earth and that someday it might end? And if they could see that, would they get out of the forest? Where would they go? I mean, it seems like they created the most plentiful society, that is, where all your needs were met, the society where no one was a slave to anyone else, a society where everyone was free, and for a period that existed longer than any period in human history. So, should they have left that because it might end? I don't think so. But could they have predicted it? Maybe. Lao Tzu. Why did the Twa abandon the technological aspects of civilization? Examples of which would be the construction of cities and the use of machines. Well, first of all, most Twa who during the hunter-gatherer stage existed stayed in that stage. And then as the agrarian system comes along, some of them exited it and became agriculturalists. Some did both, continued to hunt and do agriculture. And then, like in Kemet, they decided to innovate civilization. So the Twa themselves say that they invented all of this and then decided to walk away from it. I say, I'm not so sure they decided to walk away from it. I think that in Kemet, it was the conquest that occurred Aha Mena, or Minis, in 3200 or 3300 BC, in which he conquers the Anu, and particularly King Scorpion, who was the last of the Anu pharaohs. And I think that's how they ended up leaving what they had built. But as the a number of people say, there were Twa that after their migration found themselves in other places. And so then they started to reconstruct societies there. And the Dogon are an example of that. So the main thing is, in the hunter-gatherer phase, they had technology. They could smelt iron. They mastered astrophysics. They were masters of all realms of medicine. They could heal people real quick, performing surgery in the forest. See, a lot of us are caught up with the goodies of the good life. You know what I mean? So, we're saying, why would they leave that? And I'm not saying go back to the hunter-gatherer phase. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that don't consider that to not be technologically advanced. It was. And then when they experiment in Kemet, then they're just taking stuff to a real high level. You know what I mean? On what you call civilization, that is, living in cities and stuff like that. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, let's see if there's anything on the bottom here. Trying to get down here. Okay, Brother P.A.P.O, South Africa is the beginning of civilization. Gather all your fact. Sacred places all over, one to mention. And he goes into this, which is misinterpreted by saying it's called Adam's calendar. South Africa has great civilizations and ancient civilization, but the beginning of civilization, and here we're not talking about societies organized in cities. That's what is defined by the West as civilization. We're talking about the highest level of human behavior and then the innovation of all the elements of civilization, medicine, physics, and so forth. But the highest level being the behavior, civilized. And so when Lao Tzu was asking, why did the Chua walk away from civilization? He's again, I know he didn't intend to do this, but he's assuming, or the question assumes, I'm not so sure he did, but the question is assuming that when you're in cities, you're civilized, and when you aren't, you are not. And that is not the case. But the key point is when we're talking about the origin of humanity and civilization, and that civil behavior in the first human beings, then the first ones come out of the Congo, the Biaka Chwa, and the very first ones, the Kung, which is in South Africa. And I did say it. They are the world's first people. And they ain't being treated too good by a lot of Africans. Chwa, period, let alone Europeans or anybody else. Okay. So if there's anything else here. K.A.P.O, I knew an elder from South Africa while in Zimbabwe. He was telepathic and a great medicine man. The Chwa and many Africans have great spiritual gifts. Yeah, that's a good point. And throughout Africa, you have people with these gifts, some of whom are trained. Many of them are trained. Yoruba, Zimbabwe, Sante people all over, you know. And then you have some people who are just born into the world with gifts. And this is one of the real legacies of our people. And I would say this, if you have access to divination systems, be really realize how important it is to use those, particularly when you are dealing with important issues where the outcome is uncertain. And if you have people that you know are good in divining, that is, seeing what's going to happen ahead, use them. Use them. I'm using somebody right now who's very gifted at this, and has saved me from making a very serious decision that would have been harmful to my health. And I could tell, I'm not going to tell you what it was or anything, but I could say this, that a lot of people that I would tell this to they wouldn't believe it, because I don't have the proof. In other words, I have to do the thing that I can't predict would cause the problem, and then give you the proof. Well, I am not going to be the person that messes myself up when I know that the predictions in the past have been true. It's a final question here. Are we in the age of Aquarius? Most astrologers who are into this, and particularly people who deal with precessional cycles, think that we're transitioning from the Piscean to the Aquarian age, and you're at the end of the Piscean, the beginning of the Aquarian age. But it's transitioning. We're not fully into Aquarius. And so the end of this age we're in now, and one that's going to be very transformative and revolutionary, but it can be in positive and negative ways. In other words, some people's views of revolution might not be too good. And some will be trying to hold up the old order. But yeah, we're on the verge of that. And that's based on the precessional cycles. Okay, that's it. I hope people got something out of this. Encourage people to subscribe to the show. And if you can, make a donation. This is not going to me. I've got to put up some money so I can get some people in here with more technical skills to broaden our listening audience. So Hotep.